Welcome to my Career Book Club, where we explore real strategies for thriving in your career. My name is Julie Cullen, and in this podcast I get to indulge in two of my favourite pastimes. The first is reading books, and the second is sharing what I've learned. Each week I provide key learning points from some of my favourite career and personal development books and share them in the context of real, lived experiences combined with practical coaching tips to help you apply what you've learned. A couple of things before we get into today's episode. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to the podcast every week. It means the world to me as you're helping me to achieve a dream of mine, so thank you for that. And secondly, if you enjoy these episodes, please hit the subscribe button and follow us on whichever app you're currently listening. It helps to build the visibility of this podcast on the platforms. I also invite you to get in touch with me if there are any books that you would like to hear featured on this podcast. I love a good recommendation, so just comment below or DM me on LinkedIn with your recommended reading so that I can deliver the content that you want to listen to. Thank you, and now into today's episode. In our last episode, we began exploring insight from Ethan Kross's book Chatter, The Voice in Our Head and How to Harness It. We talked about what chatter is, that relentless negative voice that goes on in our minds, and I introduced a few tools to deal with it, like distant self-talk and imagining you're advising a friend. Today, we'll build on that foundation and focus on 4 more strategies from Kross's research. The first one about broadening your perspective. The second is about normalising your experience. The third is about adopting a neutral party third view. And the fourth is about building a personal board of advisors, which is one I really like. I'll walk you through each tool with examples and a bit of science along the way. So let's continue learning how to deal with that voice in your head. Inside the book, there's a story of Rick Ankiel, who was a star baseball pitcher in America, who had an amazing pitching record. Experts believed that he had the potential to be one of the best pitchers in decades. He was heading for an amazing career, but during a high-stakes playoff game, he had a really bad pitch. And he tried to shrug it off, but the inner chatter started in his mind as it focused on the fact that he'd just played a really wild pitch on national TV. And then, with that distraction going on, he threw another wild pitch. So at this point, the anxiety and the fear was starting to set in. He was on national TV. He'd just thrown 2 bad pitches. What was that going to mean for his career? His inner critic became so overpowering that suddenly he just couldn't throw straight, right? And it got so bad that he was actually pulled from the game. Hopefully, he was going to shrug that off as one bad game, but he didn't. He couldn't. It happened again at the next match and the next match. And his career just took a nosedive. He started turning to alcohol to steady his nerves, which, not surprisingly, that didn't work. And after a very short 3-year career, he retired from baseball. And I thought this was an amazingly vivid example of how our own minds can derail us once they start. And I think what I love about that example is the fact that it's a sportsman who has physically been doing this for several years in the run-up to his professional career. And so he had a reputation for being a good pitcher. So even the most competent and most skilled professionals can still succumb to inner chatter. So if you think you're alone, you're not. If you think someone in a position of authority, a position of success, a position of leadership doesn't also experience those anxieties at some point, they can. Right? You're not alone. And Ethan warns us that when our inner voice turns negative, when that chatter takes over, as he describes it, it can tank our health, sink our moods, strain our social connections, and cause us to fold under pressure, as it did for Rick. And it's scary to realise how much damage our internal monologue can do, from this increase in anxiety to even impacting our physical well-being. But, and this is the hopeful piece of Ethan's message, is that we aren't helpless in the face of our inner voice. In fact, he emphasises that we already have a toolbox of techniques to manage and even benefit from our inner chatter, which is interesting. And this is what we're exploring over the course of this month. And so what we can learn from the book is that instead of trying in vain to silence that voice, which is really, really difficult, we can learn to redirect it. And in episode 1, we discussed a few of those techniques, like talking to ourselves in the third person or reinterpreting our body stress signals. And today we're going to expand our toolkit with 4 new strategies. Each one offers a different way to shift our perspective on our problems. So trying to turn that inner voice from a source of anguish into a source of strength. So let's dive into the first tool, which is called broadening your perspective. So let's dive into the first tool, broadening your perspective, or zooming out for the big picture is another way to look at it. That inner voice, that chatter that goes on, tends to zoom our focus inward and microscopic. When something goes wrong, say you made a mistake at work or had an embarrassing moment, your mind locks onto it, blowing it out of proportion as if it's the end of the world. Broadening your perspective is the antidote to this tunnel vision. As Ethan describes it, try to compare your current worries to past challenges or look at the broader picture. In other words, zoom out. Ask yourself, how does this situation really stack up in the grand scheme of things? Will this matter in 5 days, 5 months, 5 years? Have I, or even other people I admire, survived worse? Shifting perspective in this way isn't just a platitude, right? It has real psychological effects. When you deliberately step back mentally, you often realise that the issue consuming you is just one slice of a much bigger pie. So for example, imagine you're ruminating about a project that didn't go well. Broadening perspective might involve remembering other challenges you've overcome in the past. Often you might think, do you know what? I've dealt with something similar before and I came out okay. That wider lens can shrink the problem's intensity that you're feeling in the moment. So let me share a story. We'll call her Cassie. So Cassie was devastated when she didn't get a promotion at work. Her inner chatter was screaming at her that her career was ruined. Everyone else was getting promoted. She wasn't. Obviously, people didn't think she was worthy of a promotion. It started to play around in her head. That was the chatter that was going on inside of her. And it went on for quite a while. But when Cassie chose to look for some perspective, she actually recalled a personal setback that she'd had years ago. She'd almost forgotten about it. But at the time, she remembered how crushing that felt. But when reflecting on it in hindsight, she could see that it actually opened some doors for her to other opportunities. So in that moment, by comparing her current disappointment to past hardships and the broader focus on her career, she felt her worry reduce. She reminded herself that this is just one chapter and there's still time to grow her career. She chose to learn from this and move on. And that's what broadened perspective can do for you. That inner chatter was telling her she was never going to be promoted. She was not worthy of promotion. But when she took a look at the broader picture and realised that that wasn't the case, and there was still time for other opportunities for promotion, she just had to focus on that and not focus on the chatter that was going on inside her head. And what I love about Ethan's book is a lot of these tools that he's sharing with us, they're all backed by science. Research shows that psychological distancing, essentially zooming out, can help quiet down that emotional turbulence. And one study that Ethan mentions in the book actually found that even simple mental tricks like visualising a distressing scene as if from afar or imagining it shrunken in size can reduce how upsetting it feels. In another experiment, students who were encouraged to focus on the big picture, why does this task matter in the long run, performed academically better than those who stayed mired in that moment's stress. So the lesson is that when you catch yourself spiraling in narrow, self-critical thoughts, you want to try lifting your gaze, pulling yourself out, zooming out, expanding the frame of your mental camera. You're likely to find that your inner voice becomes more calming and constructive. You can maybe even try verbalizing that, something like, yeah, this is tough, but it's not the end of the world. I've got a lot of opportunities still ahead of me. Taking that broader perspective helps turn down the volume, the noise that's going on inside your head. So that's one tool that you can use in certain situations. Another tool that we're going to talk about today is about normalizing your experience. When we're in the throes of that negative Nancy going on in our heads, that chatter, as it's called in the book, we often feel isolated in our struggle. And it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, why am I the only one who can't handle this? What is wrong with me? So this second tool, normalize your experience, is about breaking that sense of lonely despair. And Ethan suggests a simple linguistic trick, exactly the same as we learned in last week's episode. When reflecting on your situation, try using the word you instead of I, as if you were talking about people in general. So this helps you to step back and recognise that what you're going through is actually a common human experience and not a personal defect. And as we mentioned in the previous episode, this might feel very odd at first. But think about how often we speak in everyday life. For example, instead of saying, I can't focus today because I feel anxious, you might say something like, you know how sometimes you just can't focus because you feel anxious? By using the you, we implicitly acknowledge that anyone can feel this way, and it's not just me. So this subtle shift in language, it normalizes the experience and it creates that healthy distance that we keep talking about, distance from the feelings. And research has found that people actually naturally do this. They inject you in place of I when dealing with difficult experiences as a way of coping. So you helps to normalize the experience, reflect it from a distance, and it reminds us that what happened to me happens to others as well. Think about the common jitters of public speaking. So when I panic and if my chatter starts, I might think things like, I'm so nervous, this must mean I'm bad at this is going to be embarrassing, it's going to be a disaster. I'm taking it internal. But if I normalize it and I tell myself, okay, you get nervous before big presentations. Everyone does. It's totally normal to feel this way. Now I've reframed the anxiety as a typical human reaction rather than a personal failure. And I know some very famous speakers who have admitted that there are moments when they feel nervous, anxious when they are going to present, despite the fact that they've got experience doing it. Speaking in public is a very general term, and you could be comfortable speaking publicly with a small group of colleagues, but go to pieces speaking in front of a larger audience with senior managers. You could be comfortable speaking in a large audience in front of senior managers, but fall to bits if you're asked to do a TED Talk type event, speaking in front of lots of strangers. There's different levels of anxiety that people might experience when speaking publicly. So getting the jitters when public speaking is very common. And you need to believe that, and you need to tell yourself that. I actually remember someone whose book I previously shared in this podcast, Mel Robbins, who is a public speaker and who will openly admit to the challenges she used to face when she first started public speaking, and the jitters that she used to get, and the red rash that used to build up on her neck when she spoke. You're not alone. Okay, so moving on. What I mentioned earlier, you're reframing the anxiety as a typical human reaction rather than a personal failure. The inner voice shifts from harsh self-judgment to a more understanding tone. And we talked about the importance of that in the last episode. Essentially, you're speaking to yourself as a fellow human rather than as your own worst critic. The next tool is one of my personal favourites because it can be so instantly effective. And it's about adopting the perspective of a neutral third party. It's a technique I teach in some of my coaching programs, and I've seen how Tony Robbins uses this approach also when coaching. And so when your inner voice is fixated on a negative encounter or conflict, this technique asks you to mentally step outside of yourself. Like, imagine viewing the situation like a fly on the wall, or think of yourself as a neutral mediator who just wants the best for everyone involved. The reason why this works is when we're in conflict, say an argument with a co-worker or a fight with a partner, our chatter tends to be ultra defensive. It's me versus them. We replay the confrontation, we nurse grievances. I can't believe she said that to me, or I'm so clearly the victim here. Our perspective is naturally self-centered in those moments. But by consciously shifting into a third-party viewpoint, we force our mind to consider a more balanced narrative. It's like directing a movie, and suddenly switching the camera angle to an overhead shot, you see both characters on the stage and maybe the bigger context around them too. And sometimes it can even help to physically move to a new seat as the observer. And this is a technique that I've seen Tony Robbins use, where he asks the person to sit in one chair and consider the situation from their own perspective, and then physically move to a different chair to take a neutral third-party perspective. And you'll get them going backward and forward in that manner until the chatter pattern is interrupted and not as significant. And if there's another individual in the situation, you could also try having another seat in which you sit and try to understand the situation from their perspective. And that's the example I teach in my coaching practice. 3 different perspectives: yours, the other person's, the neutral. So if you think of an example, say you've had a really heated disagreement with a colleague, and that inner voice starts. And in the first person, that might sound like, oh, I'm so hurt. How could she do that to me? I'm right and she's wrong. Then what you want to do, take a breath and imagine you're not you, but an impartial observer. Let's call him Alex. And Alex is watching you and your friend who've had this misunderstanding. What does Alex see? Maybe Alex notes that you were tired and stressed when you snapped, and your colleague, let's call her Rachel, was dealing with her own issues that day. From Alex's neutral standpoint, it's not a story of one person being terrible and the other being a victim. It's a story of two good people who were caught up in a tough moment. So Alex's goal would be to restore harmony, not to declare a winner and a loser. And if you truly step into this outsider role, you might find your inner voice start to soften. So instead of, I was 100% right and she was wrong, you might begin to think, I actually understand why she felt hurt at what I said. And I want to fix this for both of us. This anger starts to shrink and this empathy starts to grow. And that voice in your head, that chatter, starts giving way to this calmer, wiser reasoning. And this isn't just feel-good advice. There's actually, once again, research to back it up, as is shared in the book. And psychologists call our tendency to have more wisdom about others' problems than our own is called Solomon's paradox. Apparently it's named after King Solomon, who was wise to everyone but himself. And Ethan and other researchers have shown in experiments that when people think about another person's dilemma, they naturally reason more objectively and with more wisdom than when they think about their own identical dilemma. However, and here's the cool part, if those same people take a step back and consider their own problem as if it were someone else's, the bias disappears. In one study, participants were asked to imagine their partner cheated on them, and others imagined a friend's partner cheated on the friend. And it's interesting. Initially, folks giving advice about a friend's relationship conflict gave wiser and more level-headed answer than those who were pondering their own relationship conflict. But when people tried adopting an outsider's perspective on their own relationship problem, like literally talking about themselves in the third person, they became just as wise as they were when advising a friend. It's cool, right? It works. It's so bizarre, but it works. It psychologically shifts your perspective. And that, when you're doing that, that unlocks this capacity for insight and wisdom. But just like any of these tools, as I've mentioned before, it takes practice. These things aren't easy. If they were, we'd all naturally be doing them. Ethan wouldn't need to write us a book. But the fact is that they are difficult. They take practice. And you can try it in simple examples. For instance, if you get a really nasty email at work and feel angry, you can feel that rising within you, you can take a pause and imagine you're reading the email as if you were someone who accidentally opened it, some neutral person with no stake in the content. And when you're looking at it from that lens, you can often see the message differently. You might think, they sound a bit frustrated, but maybe they do have a bit of a point. It stops you from firing back a nasty response. And instead your inner voice might shift to something like, okay, let's think about this. Let's respond thoughtfully and professionally. What is a fair response here? So the next time you find your thoughts fixating on how you were wronged and how upset you are with someone else, try this. Become that fly on the wall of your own life. Imagine giving both parties, yourself included, a bit of advice as if you were a wise friend. You'll likely discover you'll take a more balanced view on the situation. And the beauty is, it doesn't just calm the chatter that's going on inside your head, but it can actually help you improve your relationships because you're no longer trapped in your own ego, as we talk about in my world. You can approach the situation with empathy and reason. It's a win-win. You feel more at peace internally, and externally, you act more constructively and more professionally. The final tool we'll explore today, and another one that I absolutely love, is to leverage other people in a smart way. And Ethan calls this building a board of advisors for your chatter support. And it's a lovely take on how to think about your relationships. I often teach and talk about building relationships for your career success, but to build a board of advisors for your chatter support just intrigued me, and I love it. Think of it as your personal circle of people that you can turn to when your inner voice is spinning out of control. People you can confide in. And the key is diversity. You actually want a team of people who have different approaches to different situations, so that collectively they'll address both your emotional needs, that comfort and empathy, and your cognitive needs, the perspective and the problem solving. You don't want to go too heavy on one and too light on the other. And here's why that matters. Many of us have one or two go-to people that we vent to when we're upset. It could be a spouse, a best friend, a parent, a colleague, whoever. But that person who will just sit and let you vent. And that support is invaluable. But not everyone is great at giving you the right response to that. For example, maybe your best friend is wonderful at giving you a hug and sympathy when you're down, but not so great at helping you solve the problem. So they help you dwell in your need for that kind of validation of your emotion. But vice versa, you may have a colleague that gives brilliant advice on work dilemmas, but isn't the person you'd open up to about emotional stress. If you rely on the wrong person for the wrong kind of support, you can end up feeling worse. We've all had that experience of venting to someone and then feeling frustrated because they either just commiserated without helping us move forward, or they jumped straight into advice when we really just wanted them to listen and let us vent. I'm sure you can recognise both of those. Ethan's point is to identify the right people for the right problems and have them in your toolkit. He calls it a toolkit of human support, right? Have them lined up and ready. Know who those people are that you want to go to for different types of support. So think of it this way. If your mind is like a troubled company, who would you want on your board of directors? Maybe Alice is your career mentor advisor when the chatter is about feeling like an imposter at work. You call Alice because she's experienced in your field and gives you grounded guidance and a pep talk when needed. Ben, on the other hand, might be your emotional support advisor when you're heartbroken or anxious. Ben listens patiently and helps you feel understood. But perhaps you wouldn't ask Ben to strategize your next career move. You might have a family member who is great at giving advice that is rooted in values and in that big picture perspective we spoke about earlier. Perfect for times when you're having a real crisis and need to zoom out. And maybe Carla from your exercise group is awesome at cheering you on and getting out of your head. A perfect person when you need a confidence boost before a big presentation, for example. Okay, by cultivating this diverse support network, you ensure that when chatter strikes, you won't overburden any one person and you'll get more balanced help. So Ethan notes that the more people you have to turn for chatter support in different domains of life, the better off you'll be. You'll essentially have a specialised team for your mental well-being. And this also prevents the common pitfalls of co-rumination, which is when you and someone else just dwell on your negative feelings without making any progress. Like two colleagues endlessly commiserating about how terrible everything is. That's not helpful. Research shows that while sharing our feelings is natural, repeatedly venting without resolution can backfire, which deepens the negativity and can strain the relationships. So, building your board of advisors means choosing supporters who help you break out of negative thought loops, not ones who amplify them. So, it might involve a bit of trial and error to figure out who belongs on your board and for what issue. But it's worth taking some time to recognise who those people are. And over time, you get a feel for who the right team are to be surrounding yourself with. And one more point. Part of leveraging your board of advisors is knowing when to tap them. Sometimes when we're lost in our chatter, our instinct might be to withdraw from others, especially if we feel ashamed or embarrassed about what we're thinking and don't want to share. But often that's when reaching out is most helpful, provided it's to the right person. And Ethan also mentioned the concept of invisible support, the idea that just feeling that your support network is there, even if you don't always use it, can be comforting. The idea that if I have people I can talk to who understand takes a little bit of the power away from the inner critic. So consider doing a mental inventory. Who are the people in your life that leave you feeling better after you talk to them about a problem? And what kinds of problems does each of them seem to be best at handling? That's your starting point for building your support team. Next time the inner voice starts to go haywire, resist the urge to deal with it all by yourself. Reach out to a suitable member of your team and let them help ground you. Sometimes a short conversation, the right conversation, can completely change the way you feel and help you get unstuck. We've covered a lot of ground today, from zooming out to see the bigger picture, to linguistically reminding ourselves that we're not alone, to imagining ourselves as an outsider, to leaning on a circle of friends for support. These 4 tools share the common goal of giving you distance and balance when your inner voice is doing battle with you. And each tool is like a gentle nudge away from that tunnel vision towards clarity. Ethan's core message in the book is empowering. You can change the way you talk to yourself, and in doing so, change your life. None of these methods are about magically eliminating all the negative thoughts. That's not realistic. We're human. These thoughts will come into our head. It's what you do when it happens that's important. It's about managing those thoughts more constructively. And Kross himself acknowledges that no single tool is a cure-all, but if you can cultivate this idea of a toolbox of strategies, then you'll be equipped for different challenges. I've shared 4 with you today, 3 on the previous episode. We've got another 2 episodes still to come. Each one of those could be used in different situations, and it's a case of trying them on for size. See what works for you in different situations. So as we wrap up, I encourage you to reflect on which of today's strategies resonated the most with you. Can you recall a recent situation where you were stuck in your head? And how might that have played out differently if you applied one of these strategies? The more you practice these tools, the more natural they become. And over time, your inner voice can indeed shift from an enemy into an inner coach. I'll leave you with this thought. That voice in our head is incredibly powerful. It can be both a terrible liability and a tremendous asset. The difference lies in how we harness it. And by using strategies like the ones we've discussed, we can take the reins of our mental dialogue. We can transform our chatter from a source of suffering into a source of insight and resilience. In the next episode of this podcast, we are going to continue our peep inside Ethan's book on chatter by looking at how we can use reframes as some additional tools in our toolkit to help us deal with that inner chatter. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Career Book Club. If the episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend or colleague who you think needs to hear it. In the next episode, we're going to continue exploring more of the tools and techniques shared by Ethan Kross in his book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. If you've been inspired by this episode, please remember there's a link to the book on Amazon in the show notes below. It's an affiliate link and it helps to fund the continuation of these podcast episodes. And if you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, make sure you don't miss the next one by subscribing to the podcast to follow me for more real strategies to create a career you love. And remember, if you have a book recommendation that you'd like to be featured on this podcast, please get in touch. My details will be in the show notes. Bye for now.